Walt Disney's wonderful world of color, Disneyland goes to the World's Fair. The New York Exposition of 1964 is the greatest World's Fair of all times. We've been preparing for this international exposition for many years without realizing it.
So there's a great, big, beautiful tomorrow shining at the end of every day. There's a great, big, beautiful tomorrow, just a dream away.
Well, it sounds pretty good. In fact, that's just the right spirit. Our songwriters, Dick and Bob Sherman of the Walt Disney Studio. The Sherman brothers have written many of the wonderful songs for motion pictures and television shows, and I think this song, written especially for you, captures the spirit of the General Electric Pavilion at the New York World's Fair. Thanks, boys. Say goodbye to the folks.
There's a great, big, beautiful tomorrow.
As I said, that's the spirit. Well, a beautiful tomorrow, just a dream away. That says we're going places. There's progress ahead.
Good morning, Walt Disney Archive Stage! Welcome to our 60th anniversary salute to the 1964-1965 New York World's Fair. Who is a World's Fair fan here in the audience? Wonderful. Well, hello to all of you carousel families, U.S. presidents, prehistoric creatures, and children of the world out there. During today's session, you're going to be learning a lot, hopefully being inspired a lot by some wonderful panelists, including a few surprises. Without any further ado, please join me in welcoming our MC for today, renowned entertainment commentator, historian, and author, and one of my personal heroes, Mr. Leonard Maltin.
Hi, everybody. Wow, what a turnout. You're going to be glad you're here. You're already glad you're here. You're going to be even happier you made the choice to come this morning. I just know it. My key credential for hosting this particular panel is, well, it's twofold. I work cheap, and I attended the '64 World's Fair. I kept track. I was there 12 times, and had a wonderful time there. Not always in the planned exhibits. IBM had a pavilion there where they had these strange-looking mushroom-type fixtures to amuse you while you were online. And what they did was they had on a loop a couple of Disney cartoons. One of them was Goofy and Hold That Pose, which I committed to memory from having watched it so many times at the fair. The fair I was not here on Earth used to see is the one that is commemorated on this pin that I'm wearing. This is the Trilon and Paris Fair from the 1939 World's Fair. And that's the one where it was just before the world was engulfed in war. And the theme was the world of tomorrow. In fact, there's a very good novel called The World of Tomorrow that I recommend very highly to anybody who's interested in that period and in that fair in particular. But America was coming out of a depression, and so there was a lot going on in 1939. The '64-65 World's Fair had a motto, peace through understanding, which was very noble and hasn't quite worked out as they'd hoped. But it also was looking to the future, as Walt Disney always was, always. And that was what made that fair so compelling to a kid like me, and many, many others to boot. And today we're going to be exploring the legacy of that fair with some historians and dignitaries, people who really know what that fair meant, and whether, we'll ask, whether it had lasting impact. I know it did for several of the folks you're going to meet. And let me introduce our panel. First, the indispensable Becky Klein, director of the Walt Disney Archive. Keith Doctor, Chief Creative Talent Officer of Pixar. He also moonlights as an author. There's a new book coming out called Directing at Disney. It's just great. Tom Fitzgerald is Portfolio Executive Creative Director of WBI, Walt Imagineering. And Ted Ryan, the Archives and Heritage Brand Manager for the Ford Motor Company. He's played a significant role in that World's Fair. Please be seated. One down. Shift one down. Because I have to be here so I can see all of you. If I sat in the middle, I'd get whiplash from turning back and forth. Let me hide this so that nobody trips on it. Okay, great. Hi, everybody. Where do we even begin? We couldn't sum up this fair in an hour or so, but we're going to try. We're going to do our best. How do you sum it up, Becky? I'm going to start with you.
Well, you know, I think the New York World's Fair just made such an impact on everything that's happened since 1964, at least at Disney. We were so integral to the fair, and I think we not only created amazing attractions and things that were shown at the fair, but it started audio animatronics. It introduced so much of Disney's present love for the fans and their ability to come and watch realistic animated figures and the movement systems of our attractions and things like that. And it made such an impact on Disney. But I think because Disney is such a part of world culture, it made a huge impact on the world, not just on Disney.
It was an impetus for the folks, for Walt and his team, to push themselves.
Absolutely.
To reach a little farther.
Yeah, and boy, they did all
deeper.
of it at the same time.
Yeah.
But it started in 1960 when Walt was approached by the fair's organizer, who is a man named Robert Moses. And Moses asked him to create an 8-acre children's village that would be on the fairgrounds. And Walt didn't really want to do that, so he declined, thinking that New York State wouldn't be able to dedicate the funds for it. And then Moses proposed to him a different idea and said that, asked him, why don't you design some pavilions that would be exhibiting at the fair? And that idea was just completely irresistible to him because he, for a few reasons that we'll learn about from the experts here, his teams began an exhaustive process of identifying companies whose pavilions would be the right fit for Disneyland-style entertainment. And so the photos you have here, there's Walt Disney with Helen Traduska Adamowska Pantaleone, that's quite a name, president of the U.S. Fund for UNICEF, which was at the fair, Robert Moses himself, and Herbert L. Barnett, who is the president and board chairman of Pepsi Cola. You'll hear more on that later as well. Now, in the process, Walt diverted his Imagineers' attention away from the active projects at Disneyland to focus on his enormous effort, and he delayed projects that are very well known for, like Pirates of the Caribbean and Haunted Mansion. They were delayed for several years because of the fair. Now, in this rare photo, we see Walt reviewing concepts for It's a Small World with some of his top Imagineers, including Claude Coates, Rolly Crump, Blaine Gibson, Mark Davis, and Yale Gracie. Now, that's quite a brain trust.
And let's just point out that Walt pulled that talent from his animation crew.
Right.
He said to people like Mark Davis, who'd spent their whole lives perfecting their craft and their art, no, stop doing that and start doing this and thinking in these terms. And that was one of his great gifts as a leader, wasn't it?
Yeah, by that time in the 1960s, they all knew that Walt was right. They thought he was a little crazy, but they always went with it because they knew it would be magical. And I love this image too because you can see the excitement in their eyes. The Imagineers are all excited about it. Walt's looking visionary. They knew they were going to be part of something really big, but they didn't know if it was going to be successful. Disneyland-style entertainment had never been tried on the East Coast, and so we'll talk about that a little more later. But they ultimately developed 4 Disney shows at the time. The fairs premiered on April 22nd, 1964, and it ran for 2 seasons through October 64 and then April through October of 1965. So it was very successful, and our pavilions were hugely successful.
Walt did not anticipate that he was going to be bringing all those attractions and exhibits to the West Coast.
They just kept getting out. In fact, they were working on a 5th one. They were going to do one for Coca-Cola, which Ted knows a lot about because he was formerly with Coca-Cola. But there was a 5th fair that was a pavilion that was lost on the way. They didn't end up doing it, but it was based on the Tiki Room.
So,
Another panel. We'll do it next the next D23 event.
by the way, I forgot to mention, just a sidebar, that there is an homage to the '39 World's Fair in Pinocchio,
Yeah.
which not everybody gets. You remember the establishing shot of Pleasure Island? It's a pool cue and a billiard ball, same as the Trial Island Paris Fair. So that's just a little inside joke that wasn't so inside.
Well, because they were working on the film
1940,
at that time.
exactly.
Yeah.
Tom, I was excited to hear you were going to join us today because you're not only a 45-year veteran as an Imagineer, but you also had a chance to visit the fair. What are your strongest memories?
Well, first of all, what mother would let their child go out dressed like this? And then I realized, oh my God, I'm still dressed like that. Oh my God. Well, I would, not Italian. I think the thing that I remembered most as a kid was how big it was. It was so vast. I mean, and it was so vast. I mean, it was over 600 acres. So imagine over 6 Disneyland parks in one place. So, and it didn't have terrific wayfinding. So as a kid, I remember you never quite knew where you were or where things were. And of course, all I wanted to know were where the Disney attractions were because I'd seen Walt pitch it on television. But wherever you went, there were wonders at the fair, whether it was the Pieta at the Vatican, or as kids, we loved the United Cigar had this giant smoke rings that it would send up, or the very tacky, tire Ferris wheel, or the dinosaurs at Sinclair. There were things all over. IBM, which was an amazing exhibit. But what I remember was most of those presentations were very dry. Many of them were very educational. And I think where Walt had the upper hand was that he had the studio, he had Imagineering, and he had Disneyland operations. He had it all. And so I think that made a huge difference in the attractions because they had humor, they had warmth. He knew how to move an audience emotionally as well as physically. So this embarrassing photo, let's get that out of here. So some memories of the fair, Progress Land. I think this was my favorite. I mean, it was just an astonishing attraction. I was in theater productions as a kid, and I thought this notion, even as an 8-year-old, this idea of mechanical theater, where the people who created this show got to sit in the audience and see it, was such an unusual idea. And the fact that not only did you get what we think of Carousel of Progress, but then you went up into another show, the Sky Dome Spectacular, and then another thing where they brought you down and they did a nuclear experiment with a very sweet Disney voice saying, "There is no cause for alarm. It is absolutely safe." And who would do that today? Anyway, I loved this attraction, and I loved It's a Small World. I know Pete's going to talk more about it, but it was just so exuberant, so joyful, such a unique style in everything, in the colors and the costumes and the music. My grandparents gave me a silver dollar to buy a souvenir at the fair, and I bought the 45 RPM of It's a Small World and drove my family crazy, playing it endlessly. And for Imagineers to think that attraction was from the day Walt said we're doing it to the fair opening was 10 months. Today, that's unfathomable today, but...
Well, they built all of Disneyland in 1 year,
Yeah.
so...
I guess, but I mean, when you think of it today, and Rolly often talked about that story, but we were busy with the others. What's this little boat ride? But it was key to our future. Magic Skyway, loved it, always had tremendous lines, so I think we only got to go on this once. But the notion of, Walt was very concerned that people over the fair would be afraid that rides weren't working. And so he was the one who said the cars had to come out and be visible so you could tell it was working. Because we waited hours. I think we waited 3 hours for this attraction. But when you got in, it was pure magic. Here, I think Ford had the first self-driving cars. Here come these Cadillacs And here come all these these convertible cars that you would ride in, and they had no motors, so this silently just drifting along these. It was so magical. And then, the radio was the narration, which Ford did, I think, the first year, and Walt did the second. I tried to change the channel. There was no channel changing. Anyway, loved this attraction. And then great moments with Mr. Lincoln. Again, I can't remember what we found. It's like, oh, there it is, the Lincoln Show. Very dramatic. I think at its time, incredibly breakthrough, the realism of this audio animatronics character. So they were all, I think Disney had 4 of the top 5 attractions. They were the stars of the park. And it made a huge impact on me. I swear, the day that I saw those attractions, I said, that's what I want to do when I grow up. So it really changed my life.
Well, no wonder, because Walt was a showman, and a lot of the people who designed or conceived of the other attractions were not showmen. I don't know who the state of Illinois commissioned Mr. Lincoln, but they made a good choice there because Walt made sure that it was done with dignity and reverence for Abraham Lincoln and entertainment value. It had to be entertaining. It couldn't be like a history lesson. That's what we were trying to get away from when we went to the World's Fair, was educational content. But Walt always had a component of education and everything. He taught us all.
Edutainment.
Edutainment. What an unfortunate word.
There's a few of them that we use, that we throw around at Disney.
Granted.
We won't go any further with that one.
The people who worked on these rides, as I say, had come out of the Disney school, so to speak, 100%. And Pete, I wonder if you would address some of the creative talent that was behind these incredibly popular attractions.
Yeah, I never got to visit the fair, but I sort of feel like I did through the artwork. And you mentioned entertainment. Mark Davis was brought on to the theme parks, to Disneyland. That was the only theme park at the time, because of his ability to punch up entertainment. Things like the Mine Train ride and the Jungle Cruise were a little dry until Mark gave it jokes and entertainment through the figure. So he was brought on to all of the attractions to greater or lesser degree from the World's Fair. And if you just look at some of I had the opportunity to co-write this book with Chris Merritt, who he actually found some of the photos that you were showing earlier, which are featured in the book. And his ability to stage these ideas, you don't think of it as you're driving along in your Ford automobile, but the clarity of some of these jokes don't work unless it's staged exactly so. And Mark was a master of that. Of course, also, how do you make a dinosaur smile? Well, Mark was able to do it. He worked on the World's Fair, Small World, which of course is probably most known for Mary Blair's, what's the word I'm looking for? She was the most prominent person that brought, but Mark had some really great ideas for staging, for movement. That's the other thing, is he would not just think in terms of a still image, he would think about, because of his career, his full career as an animator, he was thinking about how these characters would move. And I think he also, looking at his drawings for the Mr. Lincoln figure, he was really aware of the technical restrictions and how to use those to their best ability. Of course, everything here had to be very simple. Yeah, jokes, how best to stage this. Apparently, after Walt saw these drawings, he said, no, that's not how Orville would sit. And he hopped in the bathtub and posed, and that's what we're looking at there on the side. Drawings that were encouraged and inspired by Walt Disney. So, and then of course here's some photos from, must be pretty late in the model building, and there's Mary Blair with Mark Davis in the foreground and Walt. So, pretty amazing. She was just incredible stylist. I love her work. We've been so inspired. We pretty much every film we do at Pixar, we go through a Mary Blair phase where we all drag out the artwork and like, how can we make it look like this? You know, it's really amazing. And we did get to talk with Rolly Crump there in the center, and he mentioned that while as amazing as Mary was, she thought flat. She thought graphically, and when it came to having these things be dimensional, she needed help. And part of that could have been because she had really bad eyesight, strangely, because her design is so wonderful. Maybe that helped her, I don't know. But anyway, Rolly was there to help dimensionalize and bring these things into space.
Becky, I understand you brought along some rare photographs.
Yeah, Pete mentioned that
Seen
some
a
of
couple
the
already.
pieces that are in the book, but we brought along a few from our Walt Disney Archives collections. We preserved their 24 million photos, so there's a lot to choose from, and a lot that I haven't seen. But we love to go through, and many of them are from the World's Fair, so here's a few. These shots are from a binder that was just labeled simply Walt's Photos. And so we don't know if he took them, I assume he did, but either they were that or some that were special to him. But they show many of the Imagineers getting to enjoy the fruits of their labor. And in these you see Tee-Hee, who is one of our great caricaturists and animators, along with several of the Imagineers.
His name, if you don't know it, was Thornton He. Tee-Hee.
Isn't that perfect for a caricaturist? But Tee-Hee, and then of course Sam Kim is in the photos, and there's a number of other Imagineers just enjoying the rides. In this one, there also, if you notice in the bottom, your bottom right, that's Sam Kim and I think it's Rolly Crump and Tee-Hee, and they're in front of something that was called the Harmonic Orchestra in the Ford Wonder Rotunda. It was an orchestra that featured 13 instruments that were made completely out of car parts, and they complete with windshield wipers that swished in time to the music. So it was really fun. There's all these wonderful little additions to the main attraction. But while the Imagineers played, what did the operations executives do? Yeah, well, they played too, of course. And this is then operations director Dick Nunis, Disney legend. He's striking a cheeky pose with the Unisphere. And of course, after all of that playing at the fair, there was plenty of time to rest on the journey back home aboard Walt's new Gulfstream jet. Now we're excited to share another rarely seen piece from our collection. In fact, we just had it transferred from 16mm film, thanks to our friends at Yellow Shoes Marketing Resource Center in Florida. And what you're about to see is the company footage from the fair's opening week. It was been long stored away in one of our warehouses, and this is the first time we've screened it for a D23 audience. I don't think any audience has seen this. It features a ton of great establishing shots of the fair, and plus some Disney notables. So let's take a look, and I'll point out people as I see them. There's the Ford one, or the GE Progress Land. Yeah, there we go.
People movers.
Yes. And the State of Illinois Pavilion that featured Mr. Lincoln. Became, of course, great moments with Mr. Lincoln at Disneyland. And It's a Small World with the Tower of the Four Winds. And the guys stage, so there's Tommy Walker and Dick Nunis there in the front. And the guys put up their own Anaheim City Limits sign. And there's several of them, including Jack Lindquist, who is the longtime president and mayor of Disneyland, there on the right, squatted down, with Tommy Walker on the left. Isn't that fun? Color footage of the World's Fair from the Disney collections. Of course, It's a Small World. Everybody loved the fair. It was blessed. Isn't that fun? So for those of us who've never been there, at least we've got some footage.
Ted, turning to you, at the foundation of these shows was a partnership between Disney and corporate America, which sometimes today is portrayed in negative terms, big bad corporations. that was not the attitude or the outlook at that time. And Walt really worked in harmony with some of the biggest companies in America. Tell us a little bit more about your experience and your findings.
I will, and it's interesting to be on this side of the fence from Disney. But first of all, thank you, Becky, for having me here. I've known Becky for years now, first at Coca-Cola and now at Ford. And just FYI, guys, at Coke, we had about 1 million photos in our collection. I thought it was a lot. At Ford, we have about 3.5 million, so your 24 million is...
20 of that is thanks to acquiring Fox.
So,
I still had about 5 million.
So anyway, that just gives you some sense of the scale of the Disney archives, which I'm in awe every time I see. But from the Ford side, I think this memo that's up on the screen right now, this press release gives you a feeling. Ford put out an order for dinosaurs and caveman. Why would Ford do that? Well, Ford was trying to get into the entertainment business, and we couldn't do it on our own. Neither could GE, neither could Pepsi-Cola, neither could any of the other companies. They needed a partner like Disney because Disney was going to transform the way that Ford was seen in the public's eyes. We had been at the 39 World's Fair where we built a mini assembly line, but that was interesting, but it wasn't what the people wanted to see per se in 1964. So there was active participation between Ford and Disney. You can see in these amazing photos here, Walt Disney and Henry Ford II actually discussing the way that the pavilion was going to be built, the way the ride was going to be built. It was a very active partnership between the two organizations. And I'm sure that happened as well from GE and Pepsi as well. And I know from the Coke side, while we turned on the Tiki Room, we had partnerships over the years. And the interesting thing to me and what Disney, it was a difficult request we gave to Disney because Henry Ford II said, we're not going to do anything unless it features our products. So Disney had to invent a ride which had never existed, which used Ford automobiles, and find a way to move them throughout the fair. And in doing so, Disney created this new propulsion system, which then that technology could then be applied to the parks and to the other things as well. So it was a win-win for Disney and for Ford. We got the magic touch of Disney associated with our projects, which we couldn't have gotten on our own, and Disney learned a new technical expertise. So win-win for both of the partners. And it was, I think, the third most popular one in our internal notes. And I showed Becky a note this morning where in the closing note, it talked about the amazing work that Disney had done, the remarkable ride that Ford never could have done on its own, and we couldn't. So it's a win.
American and he pushed his Imagineers, as we say, into new ideas and new directions that they hadn't really gone. And the technological advances that came out of this fair. Why don't you, I think you're well positioned to take us through that voyage, that journey.
Sure. Well, Marty Sklar used to talk about that time period and say when Walt said we're going to do these fair things, the Imagineers at that time were like, Walt, why do we have so many projects going on for Disneyland? Why would we do that? And his whole point was, we're going to learn things. We're going to learn things by the fair that will come back to Disneyland.
He was so smart.
He was a smart business person as well as being a creative genius. And, you know, if you think about it, one of the things that's most interesting about a World's Fair is that they're a very short duration. Mm-hmm. And in fact, some people out there don't know, the New York World's Fair is not an official World's Fair because it ran for 2 years, and they're only supposed to run for 1 year. But anyway, it ran for 2 6-month periods, and in that time period, over 51 million people came and saw the fair. Now, Disneyland at that same time period in 12 months would maybe see 5 to 6 million guests. So we're talking about 10 times the volume of guests. So capacity is a huge issue at the fair. You had to figure out how to entertain mass audiences to be successful. And I love this image because it shows at the Progress Land how important that was to the fair. More than one person admitted every second, because the lines were long and people wanted to know that they could get in. And again, Walt wanted these attractions to be moving on the outside. So you saw the building turn for Progress Land. You knew it was working. And that was really important. We also learned about things like guest comfort. The second year, there were umbrellas. There was shade for people standing in those lines, things that we took back to the parks and still do. For Ford's Magic Skyway, Walt and the Imagineers had seen at a industrial plant these wheels that were moving pieces of metal along, and hey, could we use that to move guests around? And so this technology that was developed for the fair then led to, of course, the People Mover at Disneyland and variations on it for Omnimover. So very, very, very great learnings in terms of this one.
With someone else picking up the tab.
With someone else picking up the tab, which was Walt's goal.
Yeah.
Actually, we're going to learn things on someone else's
And expensive
expense. Small World, the little boat ride that he introduced 10 months before the park opening. How are you going to move people through this? This little boat ride led to the development of the water flume system, which came back to Disneyland and Small World, and also for Pirates of the Caribbean. In fact, Haunted Mansion and Pirates of the Caribbean were imagined as walkthroughs, but not after the fair. Once the fair had introduced a way to move large amounts of people through, Dick Nunes was not going to allow those to be walkthroughs anymore, because now so many more guests could enjoy this. And these are toolkits that we continue to use today. Then, of course, audio animatronics. Walt, he talked about in that famous Canadian Broadcasting interview about the fact that Disneyland, the show goes on all day, every hour, and he was looking for some mechanical actors. And, getting audio animatronics developed for the fair gave the Imagineers a deadline they thought was impossible, but one which they did achieve, and which then came back to Disneyland and transformed the way that we tell stories in our parks. And Marty used to say, he predicted if we hadn't had the World's Fair, it would have been a decade before audio animatronics would have made it back to Disneyland. So all of these things gave Imagineering new toolkits, and literally toolkits that we use today. So very, very important.
When we're talking about Mark Davis and It's a Small World, Pete, let's not forget that Mark's wife, Alice, designed and applied a lot of the costumes for the children of the world. So
Beautifully done.
yeah, beautifully done indeed. One of the many Imagineers who brought Lincoln to life was Disney legend Wythel Rogers, and he's here adjusting Mr. Lincoln's coat. You have a special connection to him. Tell us a little bit.
Yeah, as a nerdy kid, I saw him on Some Wonderful World of Disney special, and I wrote to him, and because I was trying to recreate the tiki room in my bedroom in Minnesota, and I didn't understand how did they get these things to move. So he was nice enough to write me back and specify, here's the actuators and some cylinders, air cylinders, and so on. So I still have the letter, of course.
And you have more than that.
Yeah, no, it was a great connection to make with him. Yeah.
Becky, I think you have a special story to share about our favorite grandmother from the World's Fair.
I do.
Tell us about Miss G.E. Fair.
Yes, I brought some other footage that is really, really fun. As part of Grandma, who was, of course, in the General Electric Carousel Progress, as part of her tour across the East Coast and the Midwest, Grandma met New York Mets manager Casey Stengel in Florida. And upon meeting her, he remarked, "She's got a pretty good wink." She was said to range in the age of somewhere between 2 and 92, and she weighed a mere 35 pounds. So she got to fly half fare. I wish they did that today.
Gone are the days, yeah.
Yeah. So now overall she had a very pleasant tour, aside from one unfortunate incident in Minneapolis when her hostess accidentally dropped her into a snowdrift while rushing for the plane. But she got through it, and we have another very rare piece of footage for you that is a 1965 newsreel that it features Walt Disney with our favorite ambassadress of the fair.
Walt Disney shows up at International Airport in Los Angeles, escorting Grandma, the first of 32 unique audio animatronic figures which were sent to perform in the $14 million Progress Land show at the New York World's Fair. Grandma Fair got checked in at the ticket counter as a regular first-class passenger. Mr. Disney personally wheeled her down the ramp toward the jet ladder. Another marvel from the mind of Walt Disney.
Look at that grin.
Pretty sure Alfred Hitchcock saw that footage.
I was just gonna say, oh, wasn't that sweet?
All this creativity and innovation obviously paid off. Becky, just how much did it pay off?
Oh, very, very successful. You know, as I mentioned earlier, there was a feeling that East Coast audiences were just too sophisticated for Disneyland-style entertainment. But these 4 shows wound up proving, they were 4 out of the top 5 at the fair, as Tom said, and they proved that there was an appetite on the East Coast, and of course that led to Project Florida and eventually Walt Disney World. This was something very, very special, and now I think maybe we should talk about the impact of the fair?
Yes.
Because so much came out of it, not just Walt Disney World.
Well, yes, this is a good opportunity to talk about the lasting effects of the fair. Tom, tell us about Epcot and how this fair helped shape the Epcot that Walt dreamed of and the Epcot that actually was realized.
Well, as Becky said, Walt was really using the fair as a chance to test Disney-style entertainment. It's hard to believe today. It's like, why wouldn't it work on the East Coast versus the West Coast? But he was using it to test that. But he had, of course, the bigger idea in mind, which was Epcot for Florida. Of course, he would build another Magic Kingdom park, but this was his dream. And there were things within his original idea that still had touch points to the fair. You know, he had the International Shopping Street, an idea from Disneyland, but also I think seeing all of the countries at the World's Fair showed, you know, the interest in all the different foods and flavors and music and costumes and cultures. And he also had envisioned as part of his original city that there would be an industrial park where you would take a people mover out and you would see what corporations were doing to invent a better tomorrow. So that idea was already instilled in Walt's mind about corporations helping to build a better world. But of course, after Walt passed, the Epcot idea shifted and it became more of a showcase. But those ideas still remain. So this was an early idea for a World Showcase that would have been where the Transportation and Ticket Center is now down at Walt Disney World. But all that idea, very World's Fair, if you look at some of the images in our image vault, very, very World's Fair styled. And then the Future World section, where corporations would be displaying new technologies for creating better cities of tomorrow. So those ideas did continue, and they came part of, those 2 ideas melded into what we know as originally Epcot Center. And of course, this early rendering, you see how much it changed over time. But those Imagineers had developed the World's Fair exhibits with Walt, and they were the same Imagineers that continued that vision. And so some of the things, you know, the upper left, of course, you had in the Universe of Energy, the dinosaurs make a reappearance. And in the upper right corner, the World of Motion, the original GM attraction, those vehicles came outside so you could see the attraction was working. Not as much of an issue for us as the World's Fair, and also the storyline of the original World of Motion from cave era, to futuristic cities. So even the same sort of act structure in some ways came with it. And then down below on the left, Horizons, which really to us was sort of a continuation of the Carousel family, you know, taking it into a future. We even put the Great Big Beautiful Tomorrow song in one of the early acts of it. So it was a very intentional play to continue that GE family thing. And even most recently with Guardians of the Galaxy Cosmic Rewind coming to Epcot, crafting the story to make sense in Epcot to say that Xandar was coming to Epcot as a country would come to the World's Fair. And all the pre-show done in a very World's Fair style of presentations, of learning about the cosmos and the galaxies, and even Walt Disney makes an appearance in one of the exhibits showing his designs for Epcot, which the Xandarians copied in their city. So Walt's legacy lives on even far, far away. So many of those things from the fair have touch points. And I think Epcot really is, you know, a legacy of the New York World's Fair, made in a time period when there was not a lot of hope or optimism, and that was what Walt really wanted to do, was communicate hope and optimism for a better future. And so those themes, oh, by the way, in Cosmic Rewind, we actually took the Peace Through Understanding slogan from the New York World Tour and used it, again, without rights, by the way. That legacy does live on in Epcot.
I wanted to live in Epcot the way Walt originally promoted it and described it. All the telephone poles and electricity, that would all be underground. There would be harmonic planning of the roadways so that people who were commuting to work were not in traffic jams or held up at red lights. Everything that he envisioned was just sounded wonderful, a wonderful world of tomorrow. To talk about the lasting impact on the Ford Motor Company.
I will, and it was a lasting impact, and it's one word: Mustang. Ford used the World's Fair as the opportunity to introduce the Mustang to the world. And I always say that the baby boomers wanted their own music, and they got the Beatles, their own fashion, they've got long hair and bell bottoms in their own car, and they got the Mustang. It was a sensation, and it changed the way that automobile companies think about presenting products to the rest of the world. Instead of being at the Detroit Auto Show and pulling a sheet off of a car and saying, here it is, Ford presented it to the world via the World's Fair. It premiered in April of 1964, and the World's Fair and the Mustang became entwined together. They're inseparable, and the World's Fair had captured the imagination of the world, and the Mustang leaned into that imagination, that passion, the spirit of optimism that the fair offered, which then transferred to the car for a new generation. You can see in some of the photos, the Mustang was one of the 144 vehicles that you got in. We had Continentals and Galaxies, but the Mustang was the one. We had 12 of them that were in the fair the first year, and we swapped out those for 12 more the second year. You said 56 million people at the pavilion, 15 million people rode at the Ford ride, and the Mustang became a part of the pop culture. The media, the first time they ever saw the vehicle was at the World's Fair. And so every time we do a car release today, it's like all the companies, all the automobile manufacturers have to outthink themselves. They have to continue to expand the way that they do it. The Mustang and the fair were so interesting for Walt that he actually came back on the first anniversary of the opening of the fair to cut the ribbon, and you can see the Mustang in the background there, along with the rabbits, which are unexplainable to me.
We're still trying to figure that one out too.
Maybe Harvey was in the car, I don't know. But the fair and the Mustang were so integral together, and the fairy dust that was the fair was sprinkled onto the Mustang. And I have to say, if you go to the show hall, make sure to check out the Disney Archives exhibit with the different automobiles, and you can see one of the original 12 Mustangs that was actually at the fair is on display at that exhibit. We had pulled the engines out because they were too heavy with the engines, and Ford was so cheap, I can say that because I worked there. We put the engines back in them, and we sold them to the general public after the fair.
That's how they got out. Okay.
So after 56 million guests, I guess they were slightly used.
But go make
Low
sure to check
mileage
it out.
though.
Yeah, no engine, just went in a circle. But it was a lasting impact on Ford and the way we do cars.
Well, one of the things that several people have talked about movement, and that you can see the things were moving. They deliberately designed things to be indoor, outdoor. That was very appealing to me, and I'm sure lots of other kids who are impatient. And with so much ground to cover, you did a lot of walking at the fair, a lot of standing in line at the fair. And the idea that there was movement ahead was kind of encouraging, cheered you on, wanted you to stay there and wait it out. I waited it out. I had a 68 Mustang, but I got it in 1970. I got it used in 1970, but what a wonderful car, wonderful car. Pete, how about in the world of filmmaking? Do you think that the fair had lasting impact or resonance?
Yeah, I mean, this may surprise people, but when we were making Monsters, Inc., we definitely looked at the World's Fair architecture, and we're trying to evoke that sense of grandeur and, you know, the might of industry and all of that. So that was definitely inspiring. As we were working on what became The Good Dinosaur, Bob Peterson had been to the World's Fair, recalled seeing those dinosaurs, and wanted to get the feel of the fair somehow into the film. It kind of grew beyond that, I think, but that was an inspiration earlier. And going on those boat rides, It's a Small World and stuff, just always has a mesmerizing feel, and we had talked about this even in the first Inside Out. It made it into the second one, the stream of consciousness, just feeling like somehow you're transported, and those were all inspired by the World's Fair.
We have another filmmaker with us today who literally recreated the World's Fair for one of his forward-focused projects. Let's welcome the award-winning production designer of Marvel's upcoming Captain America: Brave New World, supervising art director of Disney's 2015 sci-fi film, Tomorrowland, Mr. Ramsey Avery. Welcome, sir.
Hello.
Tell us a little about your points of inspiration.
Multiple versions of points of inspiration from books or from movies or television shows that I saw when I was growing up, but two things that have, in the real world, that have stuck with me were first coming to Disneyland when I was 13 and just experiencing the awe and the wonder.
Where did you grow up?
What's that?
Where did you grow up?
Wyoming.
Mm-hmm.
And then secondly, getting to the 1986 World's Fair in Vancouver, where I saw this other version of how people create worlds and inspire optimism. And that kind of engendered in me a sense of trying to figure out how do you create optimism and happiness and create a world in the same version of that. And I followed kind of looking into other World's Fairs and ran across the 64 World's Fair, and having discovered that it related back to my joy of Disneyland. It was one of those goosebump moments in my life, you know, and has that sense of wonder and optimism has kind of guided every type of design work I try to do.
Talk more specifically about Tomorrowland and what you tried to achieve.
Well, we had to, at the beginning of the movie, create the ground plane for what drove Frank and the sense of the world that he was trying to build when they were trying to create their version of Tomorrowland. And to set that up, the idea was to show Frank traveling through the World's Fair. And so we had to figure out a way to recreate the World's Fair. And one of the things that both the director, Brad Bird, and the production designer, Scott Chambliss, wanted to do was to make it as absolutely real as we could. We could have done a lot of visual effects. The technology exists, but to make it really real for the audience and for the actors, to build as much as you possibly can, works the best for the filmmaking. So we couldn't actually go to Flushing Meadows, and not much of the World's Fair exists. The Unisphere is still there in Flushing Meadows, but not much else. So we ended up going to Vancouver to shoot for multiple reasons, not the least of which are the tax credits you get in Canada. So there were reasons to try to we had to try to figure out how to make things real. So this is a campus in one of the universities there in Vancouver, and it gave us this great template to start from. And then from this, we could create this. And the thing about that is that the first 200 feet of that is entirely real. Mother Nature grew the trees into the leaves for springtime. We had a weekend to come in and do this because it was an active campus. And we weren't even allowed to drive vehicles along the roadways there, so we had to load all of these flags and plants and flowers and add all of that in a few days, shoot it in a day, take it out, dress 800 extras in period costumes, and carried that through. And the way we could figure out how to get to that was through a bunch of research. We really heavily relied on what was really there. And we started off with going to archives and figuring out what was there, and it turned out in terms of the rest of the World's Fair, they were good at the Disney stuff, but not with the rest of the World's Fair. So that we discovered that the World's Fair Corporation had dumped all of their records at the New York Public Library, and so we sent somebody there to try to look at that. They wouldn't let us take copies of anything. Photographs are very dark, very blurry. That didn't help us very much. And then through online forums, we discovered Bill Cotter and his 10,000 pictures of the World's Fair. So from that, we were able to start developing various ideas of how to recreate parts and pieces of the World's Fair. One of the main sets was, I'm sorry, can you go back for just a second there? One of the main sets was the Hall of Invention, which doesn't actually exist at the World's Fair, but we used all that reference imagery to come up with parts and pieces we could combine to make this one particular piece, which was a key moment of the storytelling. This is actually a 1960s building in Vancouver. It's the Macmillan Space Center that we turned into our invention. It matched a lot of that architecture you've been seeing in the slides previously. There are some weird things here. There's a giant steel crab in front of the space. I don't know what that was there for, but they were nice enough to get a big crane and take it out for us. And we put our own sculptures that did match sculptures that we found in the reference from the World's Fair to be able to make this piece feel realistic to the rest of the experience of the images we saw in the reference. But one of the things that we learned about looking at all this reference, if you look at the next slide where we're now looking at, this is really the Pepsi Pavilion. It's a small world. You've been seeing some pictures of that. When we showed all these reference images to one of our producers who had been to the fair, he said, well, these pictures don't look like I remember it being. It was much more colorful. It was much more vibrant. It was bigger and bolder. We kind of took that to heart to say what we really needed to recreate in the movie was not the exact specifics of everything, but that kind of emotional truism. That's what really drove Frank and created that was the goal we wanted to get across to the audience, is this feeling of optimism and joy and happiness that Frank felt at the World's Fair. So we started to develop artwork for this to take that general idea you see in this imagery and make it bolder and brighter and with more texture. So it still represents the reality of what was there, but started to bring some more kind of that emotional truism and optimism into the construction of it. And then from that, we developed how to break it down into various film components. So in front of the Space Center, there was a parking lot that had some curbs and some grass, and we could build parts and pieces of components of that matched the elements that we needed to match to have people touching real things. And then in the magic of filmmaking, then we were able to then create that this is how it looked in the final frame. And you can see how what Brad was going for was to create this sense of really rich vibrancy and a much more kind of emotional kind of involvement in the storytelling, for kind of how that producer remembered it rather than how it really was. But then once we figured out how to create this exterior, then we actually had to get Frank into the small world and then travel through the attraction. And of course, the one that's in Disneyland is actually mostly the attraction that was in New York. In fact, you can actually, on behind parts and pieces of the scenery, you can still see the shipping labels from New York to LA in there. And so we did a whole kind of series of explorations of how we might be able to use the Anaheim attraction to actually film it. And the parks were amazing to be able to let us get in there and do some work with it. And we did a whole digital model where we were able to work through a storyboarding process to figure out how to hide the Mary Blair. It's a beautiful facade, but it wasn't the facade that was there in New York. So we had to figure out how to not have to make it visual effects go away, but how to actually figure out how to run the camera through so we didn't see it. And then the parks helped us by doing things by taking the topiary out, which was amazing to us, and then they would put it back in afterwards. We were actually able to film this in between the holiday version of It's a Small World and then putting it back to the regular version of it. So we would tour through the attraction when it was kind of in its downstage. And there's one thing, you know, looking at all those Small World dolls without their clothes going through their emotions is something you just don't ever unsee that. They were able to get us, let us move in and hide some of the things that are more contemporary than what were there in '64, and then also to add the things in that we needed to add in. For example, we had to run the boats through and it had to stop in the final scene. So they let us put in this dike that stopped the boat and held it in place. And then back in Vancouver, we actually built a small version of that set several tens of feet up in the air and then dropped the boat down a flume that we built on a stage. And for that flume, we actually used the exact dimensions from the first drop in the Pirates of the Caribbean. So it's the same length and the same angle that drops down there and into a set. And then into that set, then we had to take out the flume and rebuild the set for the elevator set that's in the middle of that. So really, to recreate the entire World's Fair, we ended up having to go to 4 different cities: Orlando, Vancouver, some plate work in New York, and also in Anaheim. And we had multiple locations and multiple sets and stage work, and from that, we were able to create a version of what you can see here.
Let's take a look at some of the finished product now.
There's a great, big, beautiful tomorrow, shining at the end of every day. There's a great, big, beautiful tomorrow, and tomorrow's just a dream away.
Production designers don't get enough credit. You are an example of someone who makes the impossible possible, and not just using CGI. And that's what I think is most impressive.
As much as we can, we really don't want to do the visual effects. I mean, some things you have to, they're too big or they're too strange,
Yeah.
but as much as you can build it real, whether that's the fantasy worlds that we did for Middle-earth on Lord of the Rings, or even for the very grounded environments that we were doing for Captain America, as much as you can make it real for the actors and for the audience.
I was going to say, the actors feel it too.
Oh, they definitely do, yeah. It makes a big difference in their performance.
Mm-hmm. Well, gee, thank you for being here, for illuminating all of that for us. Ramsey, I know you've worked more than once for Marvel, and you may notice we have a couple of empty seats, vacant seats over there. So we're going to invite a couple of people out who play a key role in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, who happen to be big fans of the 1964 World's Fair. Why don't we welcome these two giants? They're titans of the film industry. Filmmaker, actor, and Disney legend, Jon Favreau, and the president of Marvel Studios, Kevin Feige. Welcome.
Thank you.
This sort of completes the picture now. Now we're going to hear from the fan side, but fans who have the ability to implement some of the ideas of that World's Fair into their work. Kevin, starting with you.
Well, I came to my sort of fanship of the World's Fair through Epcot, thanks to Tom, and learned of the history, and was always sort of obsessed with it. And we were looking for, I think we even wrote on a board locations for the finale of Iron Man 2. And Disneyland was on there. Disney did not own Marvel at the time, and we thought they're not going to let us do that. And then the World's Fair came up because John has a very personal connection to the World's Fair as well. That's your cue.
Oh, thank you. I haven't done this in a while. So I grew up in a building called the Fairview on the 12th story in Queens. It was named the Fairview because it was built when the fair was built. And my room overlooked Flushing Meadow Park, and I was born in '66. So I had grown up hearing stories about what was there. When my grandfather got an apartment and ours was next door, he would talk about how he had season tickets. He was in the printing business. He would bring clients there, and of course, what was left behind was all of the infrastructure, or some of the infrastructure of the park, including the Unisphere, the big globe that was done by U.S. Steel. And the Tent of Tomorrow was there, and the towers, all the iconography that you've been looking at all morning. And the notion of setting this big set piece in the park and using all of the digital work of ILM to build a version of the World's Fair that I never got to see, and what it would be like if it was still going on today. and positioning Howard Stark, Tony Stark's father, as a Walt Disney-like figure that was having Stark expos every, at the cadence of the World's Fairs, and showing it from all the way back to the time of, as Kevin explored later, back to the time of Captain America, in sort of the pre-war period, or around contemporary with the Second World War. We were creating this parallel history, and so we got to get helicopter plates of Flushing Meadow Park and then build up all those images that you've seen. And it was, it just, even though I've never been there, he's never been there, we still felt a connection to it. I think primarily through Disney and how that spirit was kept alive. And as we've learned more and more about the technology, really understanding all the innovations and breakthroughs that happen that have been so well explained today. And I always, I would ride my bicycle through the park. My company's called Fairview. My logo is inspired by the Unisphere and the Trilon. And as a kid from Queens, that was always, Flushing Meadow Park is such a big part of our life. And my grandfather lived on one side of the park, my father lived on the other. I would ride my bike through it. And I'm happy to say that today there's different, my friend Roy Choi is here, Chef Roy Choi. He was there working at the governor's ball. There was a big having food there and seeing the park still alive, and all of it is in the shadow of these structures. And whether it's popping up in Marvel Comics, it was always great to see that iconography there, or the Beastie Boys album, seeing that, I like. And Men in Black, and then we finally got to incorporate that into ours.
Well, Leonard mentioned that production designers don't get enough credit. The late great J. Michael Riva did the production design for Iron Man 1 and Iron Man 2. And I remember he dove into it so quickly that as the script was forming, I still think it was partially Riva's designs and starting to build what a Stark Expo could be that really locked it in. And he was one of the best and brought that to life for us.
And there's we have, as Tony Stark is looking into his late father's legacy, looking at the films that were inspired by Walt Disney's presentations of Epcot and Disneyland, we try to evoke some of that, and then the big coup de grace was that I believe it was you who reached out to Richard Sherman.
Yes, we wanted a song. We wanted a song for the Stark Expo, and I said, like a 64 World's Fair Sherman Brothers song. And Dave Jordan suggested we meet with Richard Sherman. And I thought, are we allowed to do that? Can that happen? And we did, and he was very excited about it. And he talked about having done it. Oh, I've done this before for a movie. And I hope none of you have seen a movie called Beverly Hills Cop 3, because he did a song that makes fun of Small World. And he sort of thought, oh, this non-Disney Hollywood producer is asking to do something. I guess they want a parody. And we said, we don't want a parody. We want a absolutely authentic, real Sherman Brothers song, as if it's 1964 and you're writing it for Walt. And we gave him some of the key elements of Stark and what Stark Industries was about. And he wrote a beautiful song for us. And this was early days at Marvel. He said, can I come in and play the song for you guys? Can I come in and
I need a piano. You got a piano?
We did not have a piano. We did not have a piano, and I think it was almost as hard to get that piano as it was to make the movie. But we got the piano, and he came in and played the song for the first time for John and I believe we have that footage.
Now, picture this. This is the opening. This is the way there are many ways of playing this thing, but I'm going to play it the first way. The way I visualize it would be opening Iron Man 2, where you have a montage, a visual, excitement, a choir. Visualize my voice is a beautiful sounding choir that's singing in great harmony, okay? With that, we go on. Oh, a bright new morning is dawning, make way for tomorrow today. Yes, a new tomorrow's a morning to light up a great new day. Oh, the future's brimming with God. to have excitement, sincerity, and also genuine feel that it's positive. There's nothing sardonic about
I don't
it.
know if this has been in you, because you haven't gotten to do this type of thing for a while, but it's so fully formed and realized and authentic. And
It's very innocent.
It's authentic enough that we can play it and actually maybe even pull on the heartstrings of the audience.
I
in a
want to.
sincere
The thing
way.
is, there was a time, you guys are too young to know this, that people really do believe in happy endings. And they believed that tomorrow was going to be better and everything was wonderful. They weren't cynical. A lot of cynicism in the world today. And I say you have to believe tomorrow's going to be wonderful. That's the whole thing. It's a very positive bent. Would you like to hear it one more time?
I'd love to, yeah.
Sure. Maybe I'll play it without mistakes this time. I'm looking at
Everything is achievable through technology. Better living, robust health, and for the first time in human history, the possibility of world peace.
You know, something, it's a great
Isn't that wonderful?
And that was John Debney who did our score, and he grew up on the lot because his father did music for Disney. So it was we were so intertwined, even, and that was, as Kevin points out, before we even had a relationship with before Marvel was acquired by Disney. So it was truly because we were fans, and it was, as you could see on our young faces, how we were containing ourselves. And the notion of hope is an important notion, and I think as I speak, even I've been fortunate enough to work with and speak with George Lucas, and so much of the messaging in that set of films is also informed by this, of telling stories to the next generation and looking forward, because we depend so much on how they handle things as we age and we pass things down and tell stories and try to communicate history, lessons, points of view, whatever we can, but every generation has to do it for themselves, but it's their energy, their enthusiasm, and their optimism where all hope lies for it all. And I think Walt Disney and the World's Fair was emblematic of that. And the fact that you're all here, the fact that we're captivated by it, we were never actually there. We were just living off of the imagery and the stories and our imagination of what it was and could be. It just shows that there's something enduring about that message and something inspiring. And I think that draws us to continue to try to tell stories. And why I feel very fortunate to be able to do the work that I do and work with the people that I work with, and of course have the audiences come and share in that.
What John said about optimism and what Mr. Sherman said in that video, which I hadn't seen in quite a while, about optimism is, it's amazing how you recreated the fair for Tomorrowland. Well, we did a version of it in Iron Man 2, but right now we're shooting a movie called Fantastic Four: First Steps, and that entire movie is inspired in a large part by the optimism and the forward-looking nature of the '64 World's Fair. We have there are no pictures, but we have sets, giant sets built right now in London of New York City. And what we had said is, imagine if in the we call it a retro future look, that in the '60s it wasn't just a World's Fair. That architecture, those buildings were not just the World's Fair, it was the world. And that's what the Fantastic Four movie is attempting to be. And the whole thing is really inspired by that feeling that I think people who went to the fair had. What if that were the world? So that's the Fantastic Four coming to theaters next year. Who's this? It's composer of the Fantastic Four, Michael Giacchino. He brought his own chair.
I travel with my own chair. This is my chair. Now, none of you played a ride operator at Tomorrowland, did you? No? I did. I was a ride operator in the movie Tomorrowland.
Is it in the movie? Is it in the cut?
It's in the movie. It's in the credits.
Nice.
Mike Lazarus was my name. But I just want to say, watching that Richard Sherman footage was so incredible for me. I got to meet him one time. The LA Times wanted to do an article, and they were like, "We want to pair you with Richard Sherman and do an interview with both you." And I was like, "No, everything is wrong about that, because he's Richard Sherman." And I was doing the music for Space Mountain at the time. And I remember that just sitting with him in a room was the first time I met him, and I just could not believe, this is the guy I've been listening to since I was a kid. I had my record player down in my basement, and I would listen to that music from the World's Fair as well. I didn't get to go. I was born in '67, but my parents went, and they have pictures, and they took things home, and I still had the book, the guidebook that you showed up there. That was my dad's. I have that in my office now. So this idea in bringing it back to Fantastic Four was, when we started working on that, the thing that I wanted more than anything else was for this movie to feel positive and optimistic. And I think it's the first time in a Marvel film we actually have a main theme that's in a major key.
It is. And the first time that we have a theme before the movie's been shot,
right,
which he debuted yesterday. I think there's footage of it online. It's a beautiful, beautiful theme that he's already made for us.
But it's so fun, and it's so nice to be able to just give the world something that feels positive. Let's do good, and I want to keep doing that. Let's push that feeling out into the world, because we need it. We all learned it from the World's Fair.
By the way, we just learned today, we talked about Marvel at the fair, we talked about the Pixar connection. The Muppets were at the fair. The Muppets, Frank Oz was telling us just weeks before he started, there was a Muppet performance there. So all of Disney now was at the 1964 World's Fair.
Well, that's the kind of far-reaching impact it had. And it's impossible to describe the scale of the fair and the planning of the fair. I just finished reading Robert Caro's Pulitzer Prize-winning book, The Power Broker, about Robert Moses, the great master builder of New York, who had a touch of genius in him, but some fatal flaws as well. Fascinating book. What happened was the '64 World's Fair was a flop. Financial flop. They didn't get nearly the attendance that they anticipated. But in '65, when it reopened, there was an urgency. Suddenly, people in the New York area said, "We don't want to miss out. We don't want this thing to close." And we blew it. We didn't have an opportunity to go. So they started coming in droves, and that's what made it successful ultimately. And why we're sort of sitting here today talking about it. When people talk about optimism, I think about Walt Disney and his creation of a film and an accompanying book called Our Friend the Atom. That's a title that could only have come from Walt Disney. But it's saying, don't look at the negative, look at the positive. Look at what atomic energy can do for us, and it can help shape the world in a good way, in a beautiful way. And he made those things happen. Why do you think we're all sitting here and we're all talking and listening? Why do you think we're still talking about that World's Fair? Pete?
Well, I think it's because of that. It's aspirational. It makes you want to go places and do things and get together with people. And those are, just hard to, it's hard to say no to just looking at this amazing imagery. It's just so inspiring.
Becky?
Well, the theme of the World's Fair was peace through understanding, and I think that's so important. That's what we do at Epcot. We bring the worlds together, we bring the nations together, and I think if more people used technology and understood each other better, that we would all have peace. And I think that was so important, and that's what we really need in this climate that we're in.
Tom?
I think it's that hope and optimism that we all want and need, and Walt really believed in. He believed people were good, and if they had the right information, they would make the right decision. So we want that optimism. We want that hope for our future.
Ted?
I'll just echo that again, taking the Ford hat off. It's a spirit of optimism and a spirit that the future's bright. And you know, in this day and age, I want a bright future. So you look back on it, and you know that the 60 years have passed, but it's something that in the rearview mirror that looks beautiful, and we want a beautiful future as well.
Ray?
I think the same thing is about the technology of it, is that the technology, the feeling of technology in the 60s was that it was going to help us, it was going to make the world better for us, and I think there's still a version where we want to find the way that technology does that for us now.
Kevin?
Everybody said it. I mean, it's if you look at interviews from even the 39 World's Fair, 64 World's Fair, people say what we've all just said today, which is now more than ever we need it. Now more than ever we need, especially in this day and age. Every day and age needs it. Every day and age wants to believe that tomorrow can be better, and that's why I think we're still here.
John?
I think it's because the iconography, the imagery, the mythology connects with young people. I think a young person sees it and says, that's for me. Whether it's the echoes of it in Disneyland, Disney World, Epcot, or even for myself, looking out at the remnants of it out my window as I grew up. There's something there that seems to hit a chord that we connect with when we're young, and I think that all of us, I don't think we're here because we connected as adults to it. I think we're here because we have a feeling that we felt young, that we get to feel again through connecting with that, as we do with music, food, our mom's cooking, grandma's cooking. There are things that hit our wiring in a way, and I think that somehow, whether it was through Walt, the parks, or actually being there, connected with us on a very deep level that we don't really consciously understand, but we keep getting drawn to it because we know that there's something good at the end of that rainbow.
Michael?
I mean, I think we get one go-round, right, in this world, on this incredible planet. It's like, when I look at the World's Fair, I feel like, don't we all deserve to sort of live it through those eyes with hope and optimism? That's what I think. I just think we all deserve that.
If there was anyone who expressed hope and optimism more than Walt Disney, it may have been Richard Sherman.
And George Bruns. I want to give George Bruns a shout out too.
And we are paying tribute to Richard tomorrow with a program called Jolly Holiday at the premiere stage. If you can be there, I encourage you to be there. I'm going to be part of that show, but I'm just one cog in that giant wheel. But we all love Richard, who just left us. He lived 94 good years, and his music will live on forever. Thank you all for being here, for sharing your memories.